My favorite words. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and happy April. I have started recording. As is always the case, I will send out the link in a follow-up email either later today or tomorrow. Hello and welcome, everyone. While we're getting set up, if you would like to put your name, your town, and if you have a board or committee affiliation in the chat, that helps us see who's in the room with us today. Welcome to all our familiar faces and to some new ones as well. My name is Amanda Bebrin. I'm the Director of Housing Advocacy at the Community Development Partnership, or CDP. I think most of you know me by now, but if not, the CDP is a nonprofit community development corporation, and we lead the Lower and Outer Cape in building a diverse year-round community of people who can afford to live, work, and thrive here. We do that through small business technical assistance, property management of affordable units, first-time homebuyer classes, and housing advocacy through collaboration with municipal business and community partners. Today, our workshop is on 40R or smart growth, and this is the last of 5 workshops in our 2024-2025 Lower Cape Housing Institute curriculum. The time flies when you're doing housing advocacy. The Housing Institute is a program that provides education, resources, and support to the municipal officials and staff of the Lower and Outer Cape towns, all 8 of them from Brewster and Harwich up to Provincetown. We hold a series of workshops on advanced housing topics like this one. We also host quarterly peer groups, which are a less formal space for town officials and housing advocates to connect, share ideas and updates, and build relationships across town lines. Summer peer group is coming up in June. Registration is open. My team also offers technical assistance and individual support as needed. I like to say that if you have a local government or affordable housing question, I'll either know the answer, find it, or be able to tell you who to ask. And lastly, I want to note that the Housing Institute is very generously supported by all 8 town CPCs and town meeting voters, and we are really grateful for that support so that we can continue providing the programming and the resources that we do. We're always looking to boost attendance, so please encourage your fellow board and committee members to attend in the future. So as we get into our agenda, I'll repeat once again that we do record these workshops. I'll send out the link and any of our materials from today in a follow-up email. And I'm planning for us to have some time at the end of our session for some Q&A. And feel free to put questions in the chat as our speakers move through their presentations. With that, I will turn it over to Jonathan Berk of Remain Places, who's going to give us some context to consider as we move through the session. Over to you, Jonathan.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Amanda. It's great to be here, and thank you to everyone for having me back. I'm Jonathan Berk, as Amanda said, founder of Remain. We're a walkable housing accelerator based up on the North Shore in Salem, Massachusetts. I'm also a planning board member, so I fully understand what folks are going through on here in terms of local issues. And what I hope to do in the next 5 minutes or so, I'll keep it to 5 minutes, Amanda, I promise, is really make the case for smart growth and kind of why we're here today. So looking at the first option, the first item here is why we want to encourage more smart growth is really looking at traffic and congestion, right? We understand that whether it's highways or local roads, all of our streets are getting more and more congested as we add more and more traffic, and commute patterns are flexible and moving around all different times of day and different days of the week. And really looking at what smart growth can do for us, right? And a lot of that is eliminating the need for some of these trips on the road. So if you look at the reasons for folks making trips from home, the trip generation from home, this is US, not just Massachusetts, but the national average is 20% of commutes, 20% of trips are for commutes, and 45% are for things like shopping or errands. That's things like groceries, necessities, pharmaceuticals, doctors, that sort of thing, and 25% are social, nights out, that sort of thing. Right now, the way we have our development patterns set up in most of Eastern Massachusetts, it's really heavily reliant on auto traffic. But then we look at how far many of those trips are, right? And so nearly half of all trips generated from home are under 3 miles. Yet a lot of them, the majority of them, are still done by car. So how do we put folks in places that are more conducive to supporting more walkable access and more ability to safely walk and bike to get places and really eliminate the need for those vehicle trips entirely? The second piece here is looking at municipal budgets. Sprawl is really expensive. We look at this graphic, and I borrow this from Urban 3. It's a group out of Asheville, North Carolina, that really graphically presents the impacts of sprawl on municipal budgets. You and most folks on this board, if you're working for cities and towns across the Cape, understand how expensive it is to do anything these days, whether it's fixing a sewer pipe, repaving a mile of road, plowing streets in the winter. All of those things add up, right? And they become more and more expensive, and less funds cut to cover that when you have more sprawl and less taxable property and parcels along those roads. Really the impact on small business too. And this is kind of one that I think a lot of folks in Eastern Mass miss. I hear a lot of discussion in a lot of communities looking at folks that are dismayed at the loss of small businesses that have been there forever in their communities and their downtowns and their main streets, and wondering what happened, right? In a lot of these communities, the population's aging. There's less disposable income in place. Those small businesses are losing their customer bases, and they really end up having to shut down. And I think you hear that in a lot of different communities, but at the same time, you hear opposition to adding in more housing in those areas that could potentially support the long-term viability of those businesses. In fact, this plays out across the country. Main Street America did a survey a couple of years ago of Main Street managers across the country. It's a few thousand different main streets. And 75% of them said that providing more housing in their districts was the key to the long-term sustainability and success of those districts. Another piece, and I think this is probably one of the most overlooked and probably one of the most important, especially in this day of social media, especially in this day of really divisive rhetoric and language in our country, is the positive impacts that connectivity and walkability and smart growth bring to our communities from a public health and social connectivity standpoint. I use this quote from Jane Jacobs a lot. I really think it's apropos here. Lowly and unpurposeful and random as they may appear, sidewalk contacts are the small change from which a city's wealth of public life may grow. And I think as we see in a lot of our communities, the dialogue and the discourse happening in silos on Facebook groups. I know a lot of towns have developed two different Facebook groups of two different ideologies, and that's where the public discourse now happens. And I think the question is, how do we start to bring that back into the public square and have more face-to-face contact and communication? And right-sizing our housing supply. So what do I mean by that? We have a lot of single-family housing in Massachusetts. That's great for certain demographics and certain folks at a certain point in their lifespan. But we really forget a lot about what's called the missing middle. And that's, you've heard a lot about it, I'm sure, in recent years. It's a wide variety, right? So when someone says we need more multifamily housing, I think a lot of folks tend to think about that item on the right side of this graph. There's a whole universe of multifamily. And I think that's something we really need to get across to our communities is that multifamily housing doesn't mean necessarily big, boxy, 250 unit buildings. It could mean a 3, 4, 5, 6 unit building, a cottage court like you have here. I think there's a few down the Cape. I know Provincetown has one that recently was finished. And Sea Captain's Row in Hyannis is a great example of missing middle housing. I think one that really fits into the context well of those neighborhoods. And aging in place. And I actually crossed out place now and have actually started using the word aging in community. And I think that's a really important thing that's overlooked when we're talking about providing more housing in walkable areas in our communities, in smaller housing and variety of housing types, is giving folks an opportunity to downsize in their communities. Those numbers on the right are for Massachusetts, right? So the percentage of our population that is going to be over 65 in 2050 is estimated to be 27%. It was 8% in 1970. That's a real, I think, a credit to our public health and our environmental efforts, but it's also a problem that we have to grapple with in terms of our housing supply and the way our communities and our land use patterns are in Eastern Massachusetts. And our current zoning really is designed to lock ourselves into that 1960s, 1970s mentality of sprawl and single family and prevents the communities we want and need. And I say that because it really prevents the communities that we fight to protect today with some of the efforts to prevent any new housing production in our communities. And and this is the last piece here, but when you're talking to folks in your communities, again, I think it's important, and this is often overlooked, it's important to remember that despite the fact that a lot of the comments in public meetings are folks speaking against development and a lot of the rhetoric is against new housing and new development, there's actually broad-based public support for this, right? So this is a BU study that showed that 2/3 of public comments that they analyzed from Eastern Massachusetts communities spoke against the project. At the same time, Mass Inc. and numerous other groups have done public polling that show that 2/3 or more of folks actually are in support of zoning changes to allow more housing in their communities and a variety of housing types on that within their communities. So I think it's really important to remember that the voices you hear from are not necessarily always the consensus opinion in your communities around new housing. And that is all. Hopefully I hit 5 minutes, Amanda. Is that
I
good?
wasn't even looking. I was listening. I was listening so
Great.
intently. Thank you for that, Jonathan.
Thanks so much. Appreciate
And I will add that we know that our percentage of people who are currently over 65 and will continue to be over 65 is much higher than for that of the state. So those issues are going to hit us even harder, and we're seeing that now already. And I think that's a really important piece of this conversation of getting the housing that our communities need in the places that make sense. So now I am really excited to turn it over to Bill Reyelt from the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, as always, a mouthful, who is our state expert on 40R to give us a primer on the program, its eligibility, and what's been done using 40R across the state. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Bill.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Amanda, and thank you to the Institute, and thank you, Jonathan, for that really great introduction. And I'm going to circle back to some of that stuff in a moment. So, yes, my name is Bill Reyelt. I work for the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. We sometimes just call it HLC now because it's so long and cumbersome. I'm here with my colleague, Elaine. She and I work on 40R together, and also another related program called the Starter Home Zoning Program. And I'll just dive right in here as soon as I can figure out how to advance the slide. Sorry. Why am I? Oh boy. PDF is not.
I think if you try your down arrow,
Yeah,
that
it's
do
not
it? No?
working for some reason. I don't know what the state, I'm going to blame it on the state,
We are fully supportive of that.
Um, let me see. Oh, there we go. Just tapping my trackpad, I guess, works
Beautiful.
as well. So just quick overview of the presentation, just a sort of general overview of what 40R is, purpose, benefits, and requirements, and what the process is for adopting a zone, some program activity to date, and some examples. A brief description of 40R. It's essentially an incentive program for municipalities to adopt and implement zoning that allows for compact, mixed income by right residential development in areas with with infrastructure or planned infrastructure, and generally better prospects or access to retail and services and jobs. In exchange for both direct and indirect financial incentives. And it's really a tool, hopefully, to when it's used well, to better manage residential growth. The purpose of 40R is quite simply to encourage housing production and smart growth. And I want to pause here, and I've got the definition, the statute's definition of smart growth, which is one of those very generic, broad definitions. And it's worth pointing out that you can certainly create the kind of development that Jonathan was talking about with 40R, but it will depend on what's put in the zoning. The statute and regulations really control the location, and that's sort of the location and the density that must be allowed. But if you want to really craft something that is, I mean, we certainly require and sometimes condition our districts on, extending a sidewalk or that sort of thing to provide connection to what's called a pedestrian destination, or destination of frequent pedestrian use in regulatory terms. But it's pretty, just honestly, candidly, very, bare bones in that regard. So it's really up to the municipality to, and we certainly have examples, but to put stuff in the zoning that'll make their vision of smart growth, come to reality. So the basic requirements, and I'm going to get into more detail on these, but essentially you've got to have a eligible location. You've got to allow certain minimum by right densities based on the residential unit type. You can see there 8 units an acre for single family, 12 units an acre for 2 and 3 family, and 20 units an acre for multifamily. on certain types of land within the district, and we'll get into that as well. And there's a minimum 20 to 25% affordability requirement. And the incentives are, there's an upfront zoning incentive payment on adoption of the district, as well as a $3,000 per unit or per bonus unit, which is the net increase in as of right units, payment upon issuance of building permits. And then there's a related statute, Chapter 40S, which provides school cost reimbursement for net increase in school costs. In terms of the districts, the sort of distribution to date in terms of the eligible locations, that's what those numbers are in circles there. And there's sort of the transit-oriented or TOD district. There's something called an area of concentrated development, and a third category called other highly suitable location. And I'll get into more detail on those. This is the TOD, which is basically, or transit-oriented, substantial transit access area is the regulatory term. And it's within a half mile of a rapid transit or commuter rail station or bus or ferry terminal. And there's some fine print there, and you can extend the distance under certain circumstances up to 3/4 of a mile. But basically, that's what you're looking at. For the area of concentrated development, it's essentially an existing commercial district, or that has to be at the core of it. You can allow, non-commercially zoned land, but it can't exceed 50% of the whole area. And 50% of the land must also be what's in regulatory terms called substantially developed land or underutilized land, essentially previously developed land. So it can't be sort of a open field somewhere that happens to be commercially zoned, at least if it's sort of off in the middle of nowhere. And generally has to have infrastructure or plans for infrastructure. If it doesn't, we just condition the incentive payment. And those are sort of the basic requirements of an area of concentrated development. And the last category that I mentioned, it's sort of one of these three categories, other highly suitable location, which really, HLC has more discretion, but examples of this might include, for instance, an old state hospital site, and we have a couple of those actually that are 40R districts where there's infrastructure, significant infrastructure, but it's not a commercial district and it's not near transit, there are provisions for smaller communities and essentially access to what's termed a destination of frequent pedestrian use. So there has to be some access to that, and it's sort of a menu of items, and again, sort of a discretionary approval on HLC's part. In terms of the basic requirements of the zoning, I mentioned that it has to be as of right, but you can allow for site plan review, and most communities do. It has to be really kind of comprehensive, all in, the applicant applies under this zoning and is really not subject to other requirements of the zoning bylaw or ordinance. So it needs to be a complete zoning, and we do allow some exceptions to that, but it has to be very very clear what the applicant is required to do. You can have design standards, and we recommend those. It has to be primarily residential in its nature or what it allows. Can't be subject to building caps or restrictions or moratoriums, and cannot require age restrictions. In terms of the affordability requirements, I mentioned 20 to 25% affordability at the sort of upper end of what we consider affordable, 80% of AMI, area median income. You can exempt projects that are less than 13 units, but you do have to achieve 20% for the district overall. So the way we sort of handle that is at any time that the municipality comes in for a density bonus payment, they need to show that at least 20% of the units are affordable in the district. Most communities, I would say, don't exempt projects, which I don't necessarily recommend because I think it's really tough on some of the smaller projects. You're really subject to all the affordability requirements, the marketing plans, and all that for whether it's a 250 unit project or a 4-unit project, and so that can be a challenge for smaller developers. So I do recommend, and it can be anywhere, you can exempt, projects of 6 or fewer units or whatever. It's just the maximum you can exempt is projects of 12 units. And I forgot to mention that the age-restricted projects, 25% affordability is required. So in terms of the payments, I mentioned the zoning incentive payment. That's the upfront payment that municipalities are eligible for generally upon adoption of the district, but there's some caveats to that. The infrastructure has to be in place. Depends on what you do in the zoning. If you allow commercial anywhere and don't restrict the commercial at all, we kind of we sort of prorate the zoning incentive payment, if you will, depending upon the sort of minimum residential that's required in a project. But essentially what you're seeing there on the left-hand column is the net increase in as-of-right units. So if your district allows, let's say 130 units by right that weren't allowed by right before, you'd be eligible for a $200,000 zoning incentive payment upon adoption of the district. And then, as I mentioned, there's the second payment, the density bonus payment, and that's the $3,000 per unit payment. Generally, communities are eligible for that upon issuance of building permits. You got to have an approved affordable housing restriction and marketing plan as well. And again, that's for the net increase in as-of-right units. And the 40S, and I could take questions about that if there's if folks have, but it's sort of the net increase in school costs attributable to development in the district. As far as the process is concerned, for adopting a district, we certainly recommend that you reach out and we have an initial conversation. There is an application to be filled out for what's called a preliminary determination of eligibility. And one local requirement besides putting together the application is a hearing just before you submit the application. And that hearing is on the application, and it doesn't replace the hearing that's normally held. The zoning still has to go through the normal local process. So it's an additional hearing. Once that hearing is held, the application's complete, gets submitted to HLC. We have 90 days from the last day of the month in which the application is submitted to review and respond, reach a determination. And that's really sort of where the meat of our review is. Generally speaking, we issue a letter of eligibility or a letter of conditional eligibility if we're going to hold back the zoning incentive payment or put sort of specific conditions on the zoning incentive payment for reasons, again, maybe due to infrastructure. And at that point, the municipality can go ahead and adopt the zoning or vote on the zoning. It's a simple majority vote. Once the municipality's adopted the zoning, in the case of a town, the zoning's gone to the AG. It just comes back to us where we confirm that what the municipality adopted was what we had initially deemed eligible. And that's a quicker turnaround, 30 days. And at that point, the municipality can collect that, generally collect that upfront, that first zoning incentive payment. And I should be also point out that where we condition the zoning incentive payment, or we place conditions on, certain parcels or whatnot, at the end of the day, if the municipality permits units, we will the zoning incentive payment isn't, if it isn't a situation where if you don't get it up front, you're not going to get it, or if the initial amount is not for what the zoning allows overall, if you produce the units, you'll get the zoning incentive payment, is what I'm trying to say, at the end of the day. At that point, the municipality can start accepting applications and applying for bonus payments. So in terms of just an overview of activity to date, we have 64 approved districts in, I think, 51 municipalities. I can't see because of my little, 51. Over 7,000 units are built or under construction, and with another 22,000 zoning for another 22,000 plus units in place. The darker municipalities there that you see are ones where they've produced more of what the zoning allows. The lighter ones, not so much. And you can see that we've got fairly good distribution. In fact, the Cape sort of jumps out as one area where we have not seen a approved 40R district. We've had some interest over the years, but it's just never quite led to an application. But you will also notice that communities are kind of clustered together. So we find that when one municipality adopts a district, its neighbor will maybe get interested in it as well. And we have a strong record of municipalities that have created an initial district and then come back to expand it or adopt a second district. Some examples. This is I mentioned a state hospital as an example of an other highly suitable location, that third discretionary category of eligible location. And this is one of two districts in Northampton, their old state hospital. Zoning allows for 429 units, and they've produced 231 to date in this district. Again, they have another district as well. This map is map of the district is a little outdated, but this is another example of a community that's made several amendments to this district as well as their other district. Here are some of the projects in the district. This is Village Hill is the name of the district, and the municipality has received 1.3 million so far based on both districts in combined zoning incentive and density bonus payments. And here's an example of a much a smaller district in Belmont. And this is an older district, but I do like to point it out because it really highlights one way in which you can really use 40R to, this district is 1.5 acres. It has 4 sub-districts. So the zoning is really tailored, and the sub-districts are literally just single parcels. So they really tailored the zoning to create different styles of housing in each of those sub-districts and just different densities and design requirements. And that is something that 40R, and I should point out too that where you don't necessarily have to allow the statutory densities in all portions of your district. If it's a district that involves some existing development, residential areas, you can create sub-districts on those parcels where you allow the 40R densities in more of a, depending upon how you can tier the density on incentives and have more flexibility in terms of what the densities are there. It's just what HLC determines qualifies as developable or underutilized land. And we have a lot of flexibility in what we consider underutilized land. So we can work with the municipality to, depending upon the location of the district and the context, generally speaking, if that's helpful, to allow more flexibility in those substantially developed areas. And one last example here. This is Great Barrington, Windrush Commons, another town that has two districts, one in the northern part of the town and one in the southern. This is the South District, where they've already got one project completed, 49 units. I think this is a subsidized project where with 100% affordability or close to it. And that is it. I hope I didn't go over there.
Bill, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So much there to unpack, and we'll continue to work through that. But my team keeps a running list of all of the acronyms and jargon in housing, and I think you just gave us about a dozen more that we're going to have to add to our list. But as we think about smart growth and how it could be used on the Cape, I know I'm already thinking about different locations across the region and considering their eligibility, especially for towns that are working on sewer projects, big pipe sewer. And we also have a number of towns that are undertaking form-based code and design standards. And I think all of those sort of threads could come together in a 40R, so that maybe in the near future we can get the Cape not to be a blank spot on the 40R map. So to sort of bring in this lens down to the Cape perspective, I'm going to turn it over to Chloe Schaefer, who is our Chief Planner at the Cape Cod Commission, and she's going to talk about the regional housing strategy, because 40R is one of the actions that is included in the plan. So Chloe, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. Still morning. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. As Amanda mentioned, my name is Chloe Schaefer. I'm the Chief Planner at the Cape Cod Commission. I'm just going to provide a little bit of an overview of our regional housing strategy, which, as Amanda mentioned, 40R is mentioned in it. It certainly is one of the recommendations towns can use. So we released the regional housing strategy almost a year ago now, after about a 1.5 year long planning process. And its purpose is really to identify the policies, strategies, and appropriate areas for housing development and redevelopment in the region, really aiming to address our housing supply, affordability, and availability challenges.
Okay.
And also key to this is certainly making sure that we're protecting our sensitive resources as we do this. And the housing strategy and now its implementation is grounded in 8 different guiding principles. I'm not going to go through all of them, but certainly I think a key one here for today, looking at generating a greater variety of housing in terms of the housing options that we have available in the region. And another one, certainly relevant for the 40R discussion, coordinating housing and infrastructure as well, making sure we're aligning housing opportunities with wastewater transportation and other infrastructure planning and investments happening in the region. And through the development of the regional housing strategy, there are some key findings that really inform the recommendations that I'll touch on later. Includes the fact that 80% of our properties are single-family homes in the region. So again, getting back to that, generating a greater variety of housing, certainly not a lot of variety currently, but looking to increase that and provide people with more different opportunities in terms of the housing options that are out there. We know housing is incredibly expensive in the region, and home prices have certainly increased, especially in the wake of the pandemic, at a much higher rate than actual household incomes. We know a household needs to earn over $210,000 annually to be able to affordably purchase a medium-priced single-family home, which is more than double the actual median household income. And certainly one other thing I'll just point out here is just about 2% of the region currently is zoned to allow for housing developments with more than 2 units to be built by right. So certainly not a lot of areas throughout the region currently providing kind of that simpler zoning and permitting pathway for multifamily and other housing types besides single family homes. And the strategy really has 4 different challenges called out in it. And perhaps, again, most relevant for today is that it isn't allowed or it's too complicated to build housing other than single family homes in the region. But also certainly some of the other key ones here being that it's too expensive to build new housing, it's expensive to secure and maintain housing. And we also know that year-round rental housing faces particular challenges and pressures in the region. And there are 13 regional recommendations in the plan. These include things like changing zoning and streamlining permitting, which I'll touch on in a little bit more detail, but also things like looking to develop regional entities such as a community land trust and regional housing land bank to take advantage of opportune properties as they become available for affordable and attainable housing. Also looking at different financial tools and mechanisms, whether it's for converting and preserving year-round housing or supporting ADUs, providing greater financing mechanisms for housing for 80 to 120% or even more of AMI. And also looking at some different programs such as a regional home sharing program in the region to help with the affordability of housing as well. Potentially a good opportunity there, given our older demographic, to pair up those older residents who might need a little light help around the house with those seeking more affordable housing options. And then certainly as we go through this, making sure that we are communicating, providing educational tools to move these initiatives forward. But just digging in a tiny bit here in terms of changing zoning, again, mentioned before, there aren't a lot of places in the region that allow for multi-family housing or other types of housing besides single-family homes by right. So certainly looking to change zoning in those appropriate locations, those areas where it makes sense, certainly not across the region, but in those really targeted activity centers or places where there is or will be significant infrastructure that can support greater density of housing, looking to create changes in the zoning there. They can be minor changes all the way up to entire code overhauls, such as form-based codes, which Amanda mentioned before, and certainly thinking about 40R as a tool here if towns are looking to change their zoning, and the resources and support that really come along with that could be very useful. The regional housing strategy also provides local zoning recommendations for each town based on their current zoning and certain opportunities that might exist with sewer or other both minor or more major changes, such as changes in lot sizes for duplex and that type of thing. So those exist for all the towns across the region as a starting point for them to look towards for changing their zoning really to increase housing opportunities. But also here was streamlining permitting and really looking to develop that more predictable permitting path for housing development in the region. This goes hand in hand certainly with zoning, things like form-based code 40R is discussed here in greater detail under this recommendation, really to provide that by right approval of different and denser housing types. And another tool mentioned here that we've been working on is also looking at developing pre-approved housing plans. We've been working with a consulting team to develop about 15 plans that are construction ready and towns could utilize and adopt in whatever kind of mechanism they like, whether it's more of a guideline or model, all the way up to more pre-approval. And certainly, I think there could be opportunity to point to these if within a 40R district if someone were looking to. And additionally, in terms of implementing the recommendations, there are numerous resources we have. We developed design guidelines for different multifamily housing types, ranging from an accessory dwelling unit duplex all the way up to your larger multiplex buildings. It provides different guidelines for the building types, building placement, as well as thinking about the context where a potential development might be located and some guidelines around that in terms of setbacks and whatnot. So certainly, I think something that could come into play here with a 40R district if someone were looking to do so. We also have some model bylaws, one of which is a mixed use model bylaw. So towns could take that, tailor that to suit their needs and not necessarily be starting from scratch. That's my bit for today. And I'm going to hand it back to Amanda for our next speakers, and certainly happy to answer questions when the time comes.
Thank you so much, Chloe. Always great to have an overview of the regional housing strategy. I feel like I'm still unpacking all of the different things that are in it. In housing, we always talk about all the tools in the toolbox, and the regional housing strategy is really an embarrassment of riches in terms of all the tools that the region can consider. And that's not just, as you mentioned, not just to move forward housing production, but natural resource protection and goals around the local economy as well. So lastly, I am thrilled to welcome Andrew MacNichol and Olivia Knightly from the town of Reading. Reading actually has two 40R districts because they're overachievers. They're going to focus on one of them in particular for today. They're going to talk about what the process was like, why they went the smart growth route, who was involved, and what outcomes they saw come out of it. So this is our case study for today. Andrew and Olivia, take it away, and thank you so much for being here.
Sure thing. Nice to meet you all. I'm going to share my screen. Olivia is going to start, and then I'll jump in. Let me just get this all set up here. Do that. I think that's working well.
It's coming.
Let's see.
It says screen sharing, but we can't see the slides.
Uh-oh.
There we
it
go.
Okay.
Looks
A
good.
dramatic pause to start us off.
So thank you all for having us. My name is Olivia Knightly. I'm a senior planner with the town of Reading, almost coming up on a year. So it's been very exciting to see all of the ways that Reading has been proactive to try and address housing needs in town and other. So happy to provide an overview. Next slide. So a brief history for Reading. The 40R district in town was adopted in 2008 to really help facilitate development within the downtown area. And so the initial district is that dotted overlay on top of the existing Business B zone, which is the majority of the downtown area. And you can see the train depot is on the peripheral of that downtown district. The district was expanded in 2017 and quickly saw a lot of development interest. And then when 40R was expanded, it was really due to a few identified needs and the intention of being really proactive in town and not just reactive. While there were some commercial vacancies popping up, there were also desires for more commercial variety, the need to address, the housing shortage and trying to diversify housing stock in town, and really trying to create a downtown culture that people could enjoy. Next slide. So what Reading's 40R zoning allowed for, and using past tense because it has since been updated, which Andrew will touch on in a little bit. It really looks to incentivize mixed use and multifamily by right. The mixed use zoning, kind of incentivizes, providing commercial space and additional story, and has a 10% commercial minimum requirement. Applicants who are seeking a waiver for density in excess of 35 units per acre are expected to meet some specific development standards that can provide a more general benefit to the greater community. And that includes things like energy performance standards, open space accommodations, increased commercial space, and as well as affordability. And the affordable units are required for projects 12 units and up at a rate of 20 to 25%. Next slide. So a couple of projects that we wanted to highlight are the Oak Tree 40R, which is 53 units and a 26,000-ish commercial space area. And this was formerly a supermarket that I believe was vacant at the time. So it really created a nice, dense housing opportunity with some great commercial space that has had some amazing tenants over the years. And then Rise 475, which is 31 units and 2,500 square feet of commercial space, which was a vacant gas station. So another great transformation for the downtown. The Ace Flats is 55 units and 3,500 square feet of commercial space. And then the Postmark uses a former post office in town that is a historic building as well, and was able to create additional commercial space below the building and also within the post office area. And that has kind of an upscale restaurant now that's been very successful in town. So it's great to see, exciting opportunities popping up, as well as 50 units, which is huge for the downtown. So 40R has been really helpful for Reading to take vacant or underutilized lots and turn that into vibrant mixed-use sites and creating over 200 residential units, really bringing life into the downtown. So in total, in summary, there were 9 projects approved under this zoning iteration of 40R with 244 units, 51 affordable units, and a majority of those being 2 bedrooms or less, and about 50,000 square feet of commercial space that was brought into the downtown and replacing some vacant or underutilized commercial properties.
And it's very important to, as Jonathan had mentioned, the missing middle. We showed a lot of the higher dense, more highly visual transformations of the downtown of vacant spaces into higher dense projects. But Reading has seen everything from 3-unit buildings to a 6-unit mixed use building, 7-unit and other, all the way up to those 55-unit developments. So the smart growth district in downtown has really done a good job of giving us that variety of housing. And that was really one of the intents that Olivia mentioned too of it. And it's really succeeded because the downtown historically has had those uses. They were disallowed and now they've been reallowed, and we are seeing them slowly grow back into the downtown and the surrounding neighborhoods. And so not only have we had those qualitative wins, but we've also seen the fiscal wins for the town of Reading too. Bill chatted about a lot of the 40R incentives in Reading. It's been a huge win to have the 40R program and have it succeed, because our zoning incentive payment of over $250,000. We've received density bonus payments for almost every unit we've built because the underlying zoning did not allow residential by right. So we're talking near $1 million in incentive payments alone, and we've used that to improve the infrastructure downtown, which we'll show in a minute, pave roads, provide better improvements, and support the downtown district as it continues to evolve. Aside from the density bonus payments and zoning incentive, because new growth is a very important piece to towns, and John kind of mentioned that too, sprawl is expensive. As we create more dense housing, we're reducing the per capita cost for infrastructure, especially as it is all concentrated in an area. The new growth is what helps towns kind of stave off overrides and other for shorter periods of time. Through the transformation of these vacant lots and underutilized parcels, we've received over $1 million in new growth since the district's expansion in 2017 and all of these projects. That adds to our tax base, that helps us sustain our budget, and that really keeps Reading as a thriving community with a healthy budget, and we've been able to use that effectively. As Olivia mentioned, we've had 13 new small businesses move into town. That too has been a win, not just for these new businesses, but the existing businesses too, who have seen more foot traffic, more increased demand. There is still, of course, turnover in the downtown. We unfortunately lost places like Pamplemousse and others, but it's been a transformation that we've seen and planned for and expected, and that's why the proactiveness of 40R is such a benefit. As I mentioned, it did kind of spur investment into our downtown. We've relooked at and reinforced our water and sewer through the incentive payments and other sources. That was nearly $6 million of infrastructure work that the town has done over the last few years, not out of need, but because we want to continue for this district and this area to continue to grow, to continue to allow for what we're hoping to see out of it. We're taking a design and pattern book, which is a mini form-based code, to add some visual elements to our design guidelines within its design. That was a Housing Choice Grant Award from a few years ago. It's about to be finished this spring. It's really taking our downtown design guidelines, adding those visual cues to them, and giving developers, the board, and the public a tool to work cohesively with together to say, this is what we're looking for. If you come in with these style of developments, your life might just be easier in getting through the hearing process. The picture on the screen here is our streetscape enhancement. We're doing a lower downtown project with Data Group. We're adding bump outs and wider sidewalks. We're looking at street trees and landscaping and lighting improvements. We're adding more to invest in the culture of downtown. That gray area down at the corner of the intersection is designed to be a slightly raised platform, so that we can host more events like our Fall Street Fair, do more staging and bands there, more pop-up events downtown in the lower downtown core, because activating that area is key for a number of the businesses down there. That was a $2.6 million MassWorks grant out of a $4 million project. We're using some of the smart growth stabilization funds to offset the costs, and we're looking at other grant awards as well. That is a huge project for the town, and an immense win to the downtown streetscape and users of it. So we're really looking forward to that getting approved this spring, hopefully, so it can start construction. We've seen the MBTA come in downtown Reading through its growth. They're looking to add a turnback track to increase frequency of their commuter rail service from Reading to downtown Boston, to give us a 30-minute service and 30-minute headways. That would be 2 trains an hour rather than the 1 train an hour that we get now. That again really is the MBTA's plan, and they're going to do that hopefully statewide as they dual track a majority of their lines. But because of Reading's growth and our geography, we've been highlighted as a key area for their investment now. And as mentioned, the festival's art and culture improvements have just continued to grow. We've had more beer gardens and downtown events and performances than ever before. It's attracted people to downtown. It's reminded them that we have a very walkable district, and that we can use it effectively with outdoor dining, small pocket parks, public art installs that we're doing. And so transforming downtown to revitalize it and make people feel good about walking through it and wanting to be here, not just as a benefit for Reading residents, but hopefully will attract regional users to support our business and the train station. Olivia had mentioned that the prior zoning that she went over really led to a lot of the development we saw. What had happened since is in 2022, town meeting elected to relook at the zoning because of how much demand there was for that new growth, because we had seen such an increased spike in development applications all online at the same time. They wanted to relook at the zoning to see how can we make it better. What else are we looking for out of these developments? Some might have felt they were too dense, not enough green space, not enough separation. The effort in 2022 was to look at zoning because it is in local control still, as Bill had mentioned. 40R does give you a lot of leverage locally. What we had done in 2022 and what town meeting looked for was some increased parking requirements, increased setbacks from existing residential structures, increased open space requirements. We established a new minimum lot size that knocked a number of lots out of being able to use 40R. We decreased the affordable unit trigger from that 12 to 13 down to 8 so that more projects would have affordable units. And we did implement a maximum density of 50 units per acre, as well as density tier requirements that if you go above the by right density, you have to supply more parking or more commercial or more other. In honesty, we have received 0 applications since those zoning changes were implemented. Obviously, there's a variety of factors involved in that, between market skepticism, construction costs, how many lots left are ripe for redevelopment at the time. But we have heard that those zoning changes, because the zoning changes are really asking every lot to accommodate everything, they're not flexible enough for some of the developments, especially those on the smaller lots that have a tougher time meeting some of the percentage requirements, let alone the affordability requirements. So in 2024, what we did was go back because of MBTA communities and the need to comply there. 40R wasn't allowed use in MBTA communities. It gave us the benefit of our affordability allowances. To comply, what we did was increase our by right density from 20 units an acre up to 35 units an acre. And we modified some slight tiers to make sure the commercial incentive is there for mixed use and the parking was reduced back down to continue to encourage development because we want it, we need it, and it's expected to come. And we thought that the 3A compliance needs really kind of fit our district intents around the train depot as well. And I say all of that because there are other things you need to prepare for growth. As we all know, you do need to certify your infrastructure at the time of application. Affordable units do require monitoring and annual updates. The good news is that under 40R, the development will supply the monitoring agent an agreement. Affordable unit developments, especially at 20 to 25%, are denser. They are just denser because you have to support the affordable units with more market rate units. And so they can come with their own challenges, but the benefit has been worth it for Reading because we are now through 40R over our 10% subsidized housing inventory. A huge win for the town in Safe Harbor being proactive to not rely on 40B developments, but to be 40R centric and have some control and say in local development that's coming your way. The design guidelines are local, as I mentioned. You can refer to them to your community context. You can really build them out in special and unique ways. And continue to improve your zoning like Reading has. I think zoning is a living document, right? It breathes every day and you can change it. It's important to improve your zoning and continue to say what's working and what is not working. But keep in mind that you do want it to be flexible enough to accommodate development, maybe have those waiver discussions, maybe look at sub-districting like Bill was getting at. If you want to encourage open space in a certain area and maybe more commercial in another area, you can do that. So continue to improve your zoning. Just don't be overly restrictive if you can help it, because it really can play a role in limiting development and growth, and thus opportunity intent of 40R. So we've been through it all here in Reading over the better part of a decade, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for that, Olivia and Andrew. That is great to hear. We love to have like an actual exemplar to be able to see like, here's the eligibility and then here's the thing that your community actually did with it. So we've had a couple of questions in the chat. Thank you so much to Bill for dealing with some of them as we've been talking. If people aren't following along in the chat, I'm going to read them out. And Bill, if you want to hop in and tell us what your answers were about, I'll put you back in the spotlight. So if a 40B is being created in multiple stages and the first is 40B, can the development then switch to 40R in the future as infrastructure allows?
If the comp permit has been issued and covers all the phases, I would generally say no. There are some provisions around 40B where, you know, if the comp permit, if the letter of eligibility has not been issued prior to submission of the application, certainly 40B, you know, those units can be eligible. And there, you know, I can certainly follow up with someone specifically. It is a little complicated, but generally, I will say that if the comp permit has been issued for all of the phases, you can't then go back and start you know, after the fact, create a 40R district or for those later phases. You know, but 40, you know, you know, related to what, you know, I guess Andrew was pointing out, and, you know, Reading, as I recall, has actually used 40R to at least in one case, a subsidizing agency, cited the fact that Reading had a 40R when they denied a 40B project eligibility letter. So that's a sort of point in time decision, but it's certainly something that the subsidizing agencies have to look at when they're issuing a 40B project eligibility letter. Does the municipality have a 40R district, and have they been implementing it? But it doesn't make you immune from, I mean, if there is no development going on in your 40R and a 40B comes along, I mean, there's nothing to stop somebody from, applying for a 40. We haven't really seen that, but it is a possibility.
On that, in Reading specifically, there was one lot across our train depot that at the time was in discussion to zone for 40R, and some of the neighborhood and community said, we're not going to change the map and the boundary. And almost immediately after not doing that, a 40B came in on that same parcel. And that was probably denser than what 40R would have allowed, and we didn't get commercial space out of it. So just local context there.
Thank you both for that. So if communities are going to pursue 40Rs, it is in their best interest to make them districts that do produce results for a number of reasons, is what I'm hearing. Okay, next from the chat, if the district as a whole meets or exceeds the 20% affordability requirement, but a specific project within it does not, is that acceptable?
Not if it's a project that's subject to affordability requirements. Again, you can exempt smaller projects, but yeah, no, if there's a project that every project that's required to have affordability has to have that minimum 20% affordability. And in fact, all phases of it, have to have at least the minimum 20% affordability. So that's important. And there have been circumstances where that hasn't happened, and we have not awarded any bonus payments for those projects.
And Bill, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if 40R allows payment in lieu for affordable units, but we do not in Reading. We ask every development to build the affordable units where we want them and where they should be, and do not take a payment in lieu. But I don't know if 40R allows for it or not anyways.
Not with respect to the minimum affordability requirements. Yeah.
I like it. That is good to know. Are the 40R affordable units affordable in perpetuity, and do the market rate units have to be primary residences? So that's sort of a twofer.
So it's the statute requires a minimum of 30 years. Most municipalities put in their zoning that they want it for perpetuity, and we've allowed that. It's the official language is the longest period allowed by law. When we see subsidized projects, there'll be, sometimes, we're focused on what's required under 40R, the minimum 20% in a project that has more affordability. The second question was about whether the market rate units they don't have to be primary residences. I mean, they're.
Our concern in the Lower and Outer Cape is always that where we're creating new housing units, there's a risk of them being converted into short-term rentals, which is something we are trying to avoid where possible.
Understood.
Okay. How do you calculate meeting the minimum densities when having different housing types on one lot?
Well, generally you don't have to allow single family, 2 and 3 family, and multifamily. You don't have to allow all 3 of those. You can just allow one or all of them. But generally we, whatever the most density is allowed, and, if you allow multifamily on a given parcel, it has to be allowed at 20 units an acre. Of developable land on that parcel. So that would be what we would calculate and use to calculate the incentive payments. Now, if you allow more than that, that's important. The zoning incentive payment will be focused on the minimum statutory density. You can allow more, and again, if you produce more, the zoning incentive payment will reflect that. We'll sort of back pay that based on. But if generally speaking, if you choose to allow 30 units or 40 units an acre, it's more of a kind of we'll pay it when we see it kind of thing. As opposed to, the payment again will just be based on the 20 units an acre, generally speaking.
Great, thank you. All right, does anyone else have questions? That's everything from the chat, but if anyone else has questions, if you want to unmute yourselves or raise your Zoom hands, we've got a couple of minutes. We've given everyone enough new information that they're all mulling it over. I will say that for me, we always try to find these through lines in the programming, and this echoes so many things that we talk about. I love the piece of this that, the definition of 40R is really bare bones, and our municipalities can customize it to their own vision. All of our towns have been working on long-term visioning in some capacity in the last few years and ongoing. I think the intersection of the sewer projects with this, as I said before, is a really interesting opportunity. And so I think this is timely for towns to be thinking about as a possibility. Man, as a former planning board member, I love something that's a simple majority vote to adopt. That's a thing of beauty. Some of the other things that jumped out at me were that sprawl is expensive. And, so as the Cape, we're a pretty limited area. The ocean is a great boundary line. But I think for our region as well, beyond the financial help, and Andrew, your point about helping to stave off overrides, that is definitely something that I think is a growing interest to our communities. But this is also, we're talking about putting development and redevelopment in village centers where roads and utilities already exist, which then allows us to protect our open space and our natural resources, which I know is really a prime priority for our region. And then I just wanted to throw out there that unlocking that grant money is huge, that we have projects that, it's always the question of how are we going to pay for this? And so if this is a way for municipalities to be able to, not just get those incentive payments, but also to be able to unlock grant funding, that is a tremendous lever to be able to pull. And then this overarching, this goes back all the way to what Jonathan said at the beginning, that this is about quality of life, having a nice downtown experience, having places and opportunities for our community members to interact. You're talking about beer gardens and pop-ups and festivals. This is about unlocking housing, but it's so much more than that. And I think that is also a theme of the Housing Institute, that yes, we want housing, we need housing badly in places where it makes sense. But then also, we want people to have lives that are worth living, and that there are things to do and opportunities to build relationships with each other. And then I'll tie it all up by saying that thank you so much, Andrew, for noting that zoning is a process. You change it as you can, and if it's not working, then you go back and change it again. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time, but I think we have a real willingness to try. And this is a really interesting thing for us to consider. If anybody else has any final comments or questions, Emily, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sorry. So I just wanted to pursue the question I asked about the affordable housing requirement on specific projects. So, if, for example, you've got 6 different projects being planned in the district, and 5 of them, are meeting the affordability requirement, and 1 is going to be like a middle market home ownership project that's not. You can't count the affordability in the other projects towards the overall goal. It has to be specifically project by project. I guess this goes to the definition of what's a project. Is it a separately financed?
That's correct. We would not, with respect to 40R, we would recommend you leave that out of the district. The zoning will require that the affordability is spread throughout the project, which is, all phases, all aspects of the project.
So you would have to leave it out of the district as opposed to leave it in and not if you leave it in, you
Or
wouldn't.
you could put it in as, a sub-district of, depending upon what's there now, you might be able to put it in a substantially developed sub-district. Land we just wouldn't count as developable land.
Right. And so every year you have to submit a 40R annual report, and that tracks what land is converting to substantially developed and how many units. But district-wide, it looks at the market rate units and affordable units. Again, we've had 4 projects that have no affordable units because they just didn't trigger a 6-unit development, didn't trigger affordability because that didn't trigger until 13 plus units. And so, but district-wide 40R is looking for 20%, which we've been able to maintain, whether through just blessings and luck or really happened that way. So,
And the affordability requirement is 80% of AMI?
correct.
Okay.
So if you wanted to do a market rate segment, you could either, you could have an exemption for a smaller, if it fit within a small, 12 or fewer units, you could do it as a standalone project that did not have any affordability.
Right. And so we've modified our trigger to 8+ units, but working with Bill, they've allowed us to say we can get a waiver. If a 10-unit project can't make it work, they could apply for an affordability waiver because it's still below that 40R threshold of 13+ units. So a little tricky and cumbersome, but we're hopeful that it's used effectively.
Great.
And in general, a project isn't defined on financing, it's defined on the plan approval authority decision. So,
Although I will say the subsidized housing inventory, thank you, Elaine, that's true. But it is also true that the subsidizing, the attorneys in terms of the subsidized housing inventory will look at financing. So just keep that in mind. Be very careful. And I can certainly follow up with anyone with specific examples of that if you'd like to discuss that more.
Thank you for that, Bill. Any last questions?
Bill, can you remind me, when do units lapse off the SHI? So you can add them at the decision of approval, but is it if they don't get a building permit in like 3 years or so, they might lapse off the SHI? Is that right?
I think it's generally, if you permitted a project and it can be added upon plan approval. But I think you have to have building permits within, this is sort of an SHI question, not a 40R.
Yeah, sorry.
But I think it's the same it's the same amount of time that applies to a 40B.
I think so. I think it's 2 years, yeah.
Yeah. 2 years, yeah. That's there's 2 different things: the expiration of the plan approval and the units counting. And the units counting, I think you have to have building permits within a year, is it? Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
We can double check that.
Yeah.
Same here. If anyone has questions, you can reach out at any time. Amanda has our contact info.
Yes, I will share everyone's slide decks and contact information with everyone after the fact. All right, the chat got quiet. So I will let all of you either connect with me or connect with our presenters today if you have additional questions. I think 40R is a conversation that we're going to continue to have in the next few years on the Lower and Outer Cape. Thank you all so much for your time presenting here today. Thank you to all of my attendees. We are coming up into annual town meeting season. Provincetown kicked us off last week, and then we have an early town meeting season this year for the Lower and Outer Cape. So Orleans will be our last on May 12th. So my team is going to blitz out a couple of real tough weeks sitting through all 7 of those meetings, but we live for it. We love it. Is there a bingo card? Maybe. At any rate, we've got town meeting season, and then in June we'll have our summer peer group, and I'll look forward to debriefing with all of you about what happened on town meeting floor. And in the meantime, keep doing all of the tremendous work that you are doing to move housing production forward across our region. Thank you to our presenters, and I will turn you all loose 13 minutes early to get outside in what looks like it might turn out to be a nice day. Fingers crossed. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.